Why did no one stop the laughter when the gate slammed shut behind her? The sound echoed longer than it should have. Metal on metal, final. Like a verdict already decided. Kira Blackwood stood inside the kennel, the concrete cold beneath her boots, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and something older, rage, hunger, fear that had nowhere left to go. Across from her, muscles shifted under a black coat scarred by past fights. Apex didn't bark, didn't snarl. He simply stared, eyes empty of mercy, body coiled like a weapon that had forgotten what peace felt like. Outside the chain-link fence, men watched. SEALs, operators, warriors by trade. Some leaned forward, some smiled. One raised his phone. "Die now, bitch." The words landed harder than the door ever could have. Kira didn't flinch. That was the first thing they didn't understand about her. She learned long ago that fear fed the wrong things, that panic invited violence, that stillness, real stillness, could change outcomes before anyone realized a decision had been made. The dog lunged. 3 strides. 2. 1. But this wasn't where the story began. It started earlier, before the laughter, before the gate, before the men decided she was entertainment. It started the morning she walked through the base gates carrying everything she owned on her back, and 12 years of unanswered questions in her chest. The fog hadn't lifted yet, the kind that clung low to the ground, muting sound, softening edges. Kira liked mornings like that. The world felt quieter, less judgmental. The guard at the gate studied her ID longer than necessary. "K9 Handler Specialist," he read aloud, eyes flicking up then down again. Skepticism hid behind procedure. She said nothing, just waited. "Building 7, kennels are out back. Senior Chief Maddox is expecting you." The gate opened, and with every step forward, Kira felt the familiar weight return, not the pack, not the gear, but the past, the kind that never really leaves, it just waits. Her father had walked this ground once. Master Chief Garrett Blackwood, SEAL, handler, legend. The man who taught her how to read silence, how to watch ears instead of teeth, how to understand when an animal was afraid instead of angry. The man who never raised his voice, never raised a hand, and still commanded absolute loyalty from creatures trained to kill. The man who died in Kandahar. At least, that's what the report said. The kennels came into view before she reached them. Sound carried, barking, howling, the controlled chaos of animals bred for violence but still searching for connection. The smell hit her the moment she stepped inside. Concrete, cleaning chemicals, and beneath it all stress. 12 kennels, dogs alert, watching her like they were reading something she hadn't said out loud. For the first time in weeks, something in her chest loosened. She felt home. Well, a voice said, "Fresh meat." She turned slowly. Senior Chief Boone Maddox filled the space the way men like him always did, too big, too confident, shoulders squared like the world owed him room. He looked her up and down without shame. "Petty Officer Second Class Kira Blackwood," she said calmly, "reporting as ordered." "Blackwood," he repeated. "Any relation to Garrett Blackwood?" Her heartbeat spiked, her face didn't. "He was my father." Something flickered behind his eyes, too fast to name. Maddox said, "Didn't know he had a kid." "He's dead," she replied evenly. "I know." 12 years, and somehow the words still hurt. They walked the corridor, dogs watched, one didn't move. Apex. Scar across his muzzle, eyes too sharp, too tired. "Meanest dog we've got," Maddox said. "Sent 3 handlers to medical last year." Kira stopped in front of the kennel. "What's his regimen?" "Discipline through consequences." "Correction." "That's above your pay grade." She met his stare. "My father taught me dogs aren't machines. You can't beat loyalty into them." Something hardened in Maddox's expression. Your father's methods died with him. That was when she knew. Not everything, not yet. But enough. Another voice cut in before the moment snapped. Boone, you scaring off the new handler already. Master Chief Thaddeus Brennan stepped into the corridor. Older, slower, still dangerous. He saw her face and stopped cold. Jesus, he breathed, Garrett's little girl. The kennel went quiet. He remembered her. And that mattered more than she expected. Later, by the ocean, away from walls and ears, he asked the question she'd been waiting for. Why are you really here, Kira? She told him the truth. About the journal. About the questions. About the men who might have betrayed everything the uniform was supposed to stand for. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss her. He believed her. And when the test came that afternoon, when they decided to make her prove herself in the cruelest way they knew, she understood something important. They thought strength was dominance. They thought power came from fear. They were wrong. Back in the kennel, Apex froze 6 feet from her. Kira lowered herself, made herself smaller, turned away. She spoke in a language older than commands. The dog hesitated. And for the first time in a long time, someone chose trust over force. When Apex laid his head in her lap, the silence outside the fence wasn't awe. It was realization. They had misjudged her. And that mistake would cost them everything. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. It simply refuses to break. Why did the room feel colder after everyone stopped clapping? The silence wasn't admiration. It was recalculation. Kira felt it the moment Apex settled at her heel, calm, obedient, alive in a way none of them had ever seen him before. The men lining the corridor didn't move, didn't speak. They stared at her like the rules had shifted and no one had warned them. She passed the test. But passing wasn't the end. It was the beginning of scrutiny. Commander Gallagher cleared his throat, the sound oddly loud. Petty Officer Blackwood, he said, measured, careful. You'll be assigned to primary handler rotation. A few heads turned. That wasn't protocol, not for someone new, not for someone like her. Maddox's jaw tightened. He didn't argue, he didn't need to. His silence was sharper than protest. Kira nodded once. Yes, sir. Apex didn't look at anyone else. He watched her, waiting. When the corridor finally emptied, when the laughter and phones and murmurs faded into other buildings and other stories, Thaddeus Brennan lingered. You all right? He asked quietly. She exhaled slowly. I am now. He studied her the way men did when they saw echoes of ghosts they loved. Your father used to say, if you ever have to force obedience, you already failed. A muscle in her throat tightened. He said a lot of things. Yes, Thaddeus replied, and most of them got him killed. The words hung between them, heavy, honest. That night Kira didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bunk, journal open, lamp low, Apex curled near her feet. The bass hummed around them, distant engines, doors closing, radios crackling with voices that sounded calm but carried tension underneath. She read her father's handwriting until the lines blurred. He'd known. He'd been afraid. And he'd still gone forward. There were names she didn't recognize, initials, patterns, transfers that didn't make sense, money trails hidden behind bureaucratic fog. And always, one recurring truth. Trust the dogs. They know who the wolves are. At 3:17, Apex lifted his head. Just once. A sound outside, subtle, a footstep that didn't belong. Kira's hand moved instinctively to the small flashlight on her desk. She didn't reach for a weapon. Not yet. The door didn't open. But when she checked Apex's water bowl in the morning, something was wrong. She smelled it before she saw it. Metallic chemical. She froze. Someone had been here. She dumped the water immediately, replaced it, logged it, reported it. Procedure. Calm, no accusations, no drama. But inside, something hardened. They weren't just watching her anymore. They were testing boundaries. The following days blurred into routine. Training, feeding schedules, evaluations. She did her job quietly, precisely. Never late, never sloppy, never emotional in front of them. But she noticed things. Dogs that flinched at raised voices. Handlers who avoided eye contact. Discipline that crossed into cruelty. And Apex changed. He slept deeply now, ate fully, responded to commands without tension. He still watched Maddox differently, ears tight, posture rigid, but he no longer vibrated with rage. He was learning trust again. So was she. The mission briefing came on the fourth day. Border interdiction, night operation, high risk, minimal intel. Maddox volunteered immediately. So did she. Gallagher hesitated, just a beat too long. "You're new," he said carefully. "I'm qualified," Kira replied, "and Apex is already acclimated to my commands." The room went quiet. Gallagher nodded, approved. Maddox smiled then, small, controlled. That smile followed her all the way to the staging area. Night in the desert was different than night anywhere else. It didn't soften edges, it sharpened them. Cold crept into joints. Sound traveled farther than it should. Kira moved low, Apex at her side, the two of them reading terrain the way others read maps. Apex stopped. Ears forward, tail still. She dropped to one knee instantly. "Alpha 2, she whispered. "I've got sent multiple contacts, 2 hours old." Static, then Gallagher, "Copy, hold." They watched headlights appear in the distance, not cartel beaters, armored clean. Her pulse quickened. "This isn't right," she murmured. Apex growled, not aggressive, warning. When the firefight erupted, it felt inevitable, like the last piece of a puzzle snapping into place. Gunfire, shouting, chaos. Kira moved when ordered. She always did. Training wasn't something she turned off when fear arrived. It was something she trusted more. Inside the mine, she heard voices she recognized. And a name she'd never forget. Vance. The confrontation came fast, too fast, Maddox stepping out of the shadows like he'd always belonged there. The truth spilled without shame. "Your father was a liability." Kira listened, stored it, let it hurt later. She didn't cry when Maddox described the knife. She didn't scream. She didn't rush. She survived. Because Apex chose her. Because her father had taught her how to stand still when everything inside her wanted to explode. When Maddox went down, bleeding and restrained, Kira didn't feel relief. She felt grief. Justice wasn't clean. It never was. At base, under harsh fluorescent lights, Maddox talked, slowly, strategically, like a man still bargaining with fate. And then her phone rang. "Captain Richard Vance." "I have footage," he said, "of your father." The offer was poison wrapped in truth. She knew it was a trap. She said yes anyway. Because some answers were worth walking into darkness for. Because silence had already taken too much from her. When the call ended, Kira sat on her bunk, hands shaking for the first time in weeks. Apex pressed closer. She rested her forehead against his. "I'm scared," she whispered. He didn't judge her for it. Strength, she was learning, wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to move forward anyway, quietly, deliberately, when fear begged you to stay still. And somewhere in the distance, wolves were watching. They just hadn't realized yet that the pack was already hunting them. Why did the silence after the phone call feel louder than the firefight ever had? Kira sat on the edge of the bunk long after the screen went dark. The hum of the bass continued outside, boots on concrete, distant engines, a radio laughing somewhere it shouldn't, but inside her chest everything was still. Not calm, not peace. The kind of stillness that came right before a storm decided where it would land. Captain Richard Vance had known exactly what to say. Not threats, not insults, truth bait. He dangled her father's final moments like leverage, confident she'd bite. And he was right. Apex shifted closer, his body warm against her shin. He pressed his head lightly against her knee, grounding her. Kira rested a hand on his neck, fingers tracing the familiar ridge of muscle and scar tissue. "I won't let them use you," she murmured, "or anyone else." The next morning came too quickly. Briefings, paperwork, the slow, methodical return to routine that always followed violence. Men pretended nothing had changed. That last night hadn't cracked something open. But Kira noticed, who avoided her eyes now, who lingered a second too long, who stopped joking when she entered the room. Maddox was gone, technically alive, heavily guarded, already unraveling the myth of his untouchability. That alone shifted the gravity of the entire unit. Predators hated uncertainty, and uncertainty had a way of making people sloppy. Thaddeus found her near the kennels just before noon. His face was paler than usual, the lines around his eyes deeper. "He called you," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Did you tell Gallagher?" "Not yet." He nodded slowly. "He wants you isolated." "I know. And you're still going." "Yes." That was the problem with people who shared the same moral compass. Arguments rarely lasted long. They both understood the cost. They walked the perimeter together, the Pacific stretching gray and endless beside them. Thaddeus leaned heavier on his cane today. The desert mission had taken more out of him than he'd admitted. "Your father hated waiting," he said quietly. "Always thought delay gave the enemy time to adapt." And yet, Kira replied, he documented everything, slowly, carefully. Thaddeus smiled faintly. "Yeah, he learned the hard way." She stopped walking, turned to him. "Help me set the trap." He studied her for a long moment, saw the fear she wasn't hiding anymore, the resolve layered on top of it. "All right," he said, "but we do it clean, no shortcuts, no heroics." That night Luna died. The call came just after evening chow. Trent Aldridge's voice broke through the phone in pieces. She started seizing. "Doc tried Kira, I swear." By the time she reached the kennel, she already knew. Luna lay still, her coat dull in the harsh overhead light. One of the best dogs in the program, gentle off-duty, relentless on mission. Poison. The bowl had been tampered with. Someone had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Kira knelt beside Luna, hand trembling as she touched the fur still warm beneath her fingers. Apex stood nearby, rigid, a low sound vibrating in his chest, not anger. "Grief." "They're escalating," Thaddeus said behind her. "Good," Kira replied softly. She stood slowly, carefully, like something fragile was being rebuilt inside her spine. "Lock everything down," she said. "No one touches the dogs without me or Doc present. Cameras, logs, eyes everywhere." Doc nodded, already started. Vance wanted fear. She would give him exposure. The bomb under Thaddeus's truck detonated 2 hours later. The blast was concussive, brutal, the kind designed to send a message, not guarantee a kill. Kira remembered the heat first, then the sound, metal tearing like fabric. She dragged Thaddeus out with adrenaline-fueled strength she didn't know she had, shielding him when the secondary explosion rained debris. At the hospital, blood on her hands, burns on her back, she waited while surgeons worked. Gallagher arrived just after midnight. His face was tight, jaw clenched in a way that meant he'd already made a decision. "This ends now," he said. "Not yet," Kira replied. "He wants me tomorrow night." Gallagher exhaled slowly. "Of course he does." They planned until dawn. Every angle, every blind spot, every contingency they could think of, and several they couldn't. Wires hidden, teams positioned, exit routes mapped. The base itself would become the net. At 21:47, Kira walked toward Building 47 alone. Apex wasn't with her. That hurt more than the burns. She wore plain fatigues, no insignia, no weapon visible, just a small transmitter taped beneath her collarbone, its presence a quiet heartbeat against her skin. The warehouse lights flickered as she stepped inside. Vance waited near the center, hands clasped behind his back, older than she'd expected. Calm, composed, the kind of man who'd never had to raise his voice to be obeyed. "Kira," he said warmly, "you look just like him." Her stomach tightened. "Show me the footage." "Straight to business," he smiled, "just like Garrett." He gestured to a tablet on the table, pressed play. The image was grainy, night vision, a patrol route, a blast. Her breath caught. She watched her father stumble out of the wreckage, broken, alive. He was talking, even then trying to give orders, trying to protect his team. Then figures moved into frame. One of them held a knife. Kira's knees nearly gave out, but she stayed standing, stayed silent. When the footage ended, the warehouse felt impossibly quiet. "You see," Vance said gently, "he wouldn't stop, even then." "You ordered it," she said. "Yes." The word landed without apology. "You could have walked away," he continued. "He couldn't, idealists never can." Kira lifted her eyes. "You're done." Vance chuckled. "No, I'm offering you what I offered him, a way out." She shook her head once. That was the signal. The lights flared, doors slammed, armed teams emerged from shadow. Vance's smile faded for the first time. "You planned this," he said. "So did you," Kira replied. He reached for his weapon. Too slow. When he was finally restrained, shouting about deals and immunity and names that would shake the Pentagon, Kira didn't listen. She walked outside into the cool night air and let herself breathe. The arrests would take months, the fallout years. But the truth was out. Later, as dawn painted the horizon, Apex returned to her side. She knelt and buried her face in his fur. "It's not over," she whispered. But for the first time, the weight felt shared. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't cheer. It simply showed up, quiet, persistent, and refused to leave. Why did victory feel heavier than defeat ever had? The sun rose without ceremony, pale and indifferent, as if nothing important had happened the night before. Kira stood outside the kennels, arms folded tight against her ribs, watching condensation lift from the concrete. The air smelled clean, too clean, like a room scrubbed after a crime. Apex sat beside her, posture relaxed but alert. He hadn't left her side since the arrests. Wouldn't sleep unless she was within reach. Wouldn't eat unless she ate first. Neither of them trusted calm anymore. Inside the base, phones rang nonstop. Offices filled with people who hadn't slept, who spoke in lowered voices and used phrases like ongoing investigation and classified implications. Men who had once dismissed her now nodded when she passed. Some avoided her entirely. Respect, she realized, was rarely about admiration. It was about fear. Thaddeus survived surgery, barely. She visited him that afternoon, standing at the foot of the bed while machines did the breathing for him. His skin looked gray against the white sheets, the scars on his hands more visible without movement to distract from them. "You did it," he rasped when he woke. She shook her head. "We did." His eyes flicked to Apex, lying quietly near the door. "Your father would have liked him." Kira swallowed. "He would have hated how it ended." "Yeah," Thaddeus murmured, "he would have." The investigation teams arrived 2 days later. Suits, badges, civilians with eyes sharp enough to miss nothing and empathy reserved for paperwork. They interviewed everyone, replayed footage, cataloged damage. Kira gave her statements without embellishment. Facts, dates, names. But some things couldn't be logged. Like the way Luna's empty kennel still made her chest ache. Or how she woke at night expecting to hear Maddox's voice, laughing from somewhere unseen. Or how trust, once broken, didn't snap back into place just because the threat was gone. Gallagher called her into his office on the third day. He didn't offer her a seat. "Hire wants to move you," he said, quietly. Her pulse quickened. "Where?" "Anywhere you want. Instructor, advisor, desk if you want it." She almost laughed. "No," she said. Gallagher raised an eyebrow. "No. I didn't come here to disappear," she replied. "And I didn't come here to be a symbol." He studied her. "You've already become one." "That wasn't my choice." "No," he agreed, "but what you do next is." Kira thought of her father, of how often he'd stayed when leaving would have been easier, how he'd believed presence mattered. "I'm staying with the dogs," she said, "and I want oversight authority on handler conduct." Gallagher leaned back, considered, then nodded. "Approved." The backlash came quietly. Not threats, not confrontations. Cold shoulders, reassignments, careers stalled just enough to hurt. Men who'd benefited from silence didn't like the sound of it breaking. Kira learned to live with that too. Weeks passed. The base settled into a new rhythm. Cameras stayed, protocols tightened, abuse reports tripled, then slowed as accountability took root. Apex thrived. So did others. Dogs once written off as unstable began responding to patient handling, to consistency, to someone who listened. Kira watched it happen with a strange mix of pride and grief. Change was possible, but it cost something every time. One evening, she found a note slipped beneath her door. "No signature. You think you won. You only exposed the first layer." Her hand tightened around the paper. That night she dreamed of her father again, not dying, not fighting. Teaching her how to read a dog's eyes. "Don't confuse calm with surrender," he said. She woke with resolve humming through her veins. The call came from Langley a week later. They wanted her perspective, off the record. She agreed on her terms. The room was windowless, the coffee terrible, the questions sharp. "How did you know who to trust?" "I didn't," she replied. "I paid attention to who didn't need power to feel whole." One man scribbled that down, another frowned. They offered her a task force role, high-level, influential. She declined. They didn't understand that either. Back at the base, a young handler approached her near dusk, nervous, eyes down. "Petty Officer Blackwood." "Yes." Thank you, for Luna, for all of them." Kira nodded. "Take care of your partner." "I will." After the handler left, Kira sat beside Apex and watched the sky bleed orange into blue. "I don't know if it was worth it," she admitted quietly. Apex leaned into her, solid, present. She breathed him in, grounded herself. Worth wasn't always immediate. Sometimes it showed up years later, in choices other people made because someone once showed them another way. The next mission request came unexpectedly. Search and recovery, stateside, quiet. Apex was requested by name. She hesitated. Not because she was afraid. Because peace felt unfamiliar now. But she accepted. On the drive out, radio low, road stretching ahead, Kira rested one hand on the wheel and the other on Apex's collar. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "we do it right." Apex thumped his tail once. Outside the base, the world waited, flawed, complex, unfinished. And for the first time since her father's death, Kira didn't feel like she was chasing the past. She was carrying it forward, not as a weapon, as a promise, because strength that survives corruption doesn't roar. It endures. Why did the quiet mission feel more dangerous than all the loud ones before it? The road stretched empty ahead of them, 2 lanes cutting through scrubland and silence. No sirens, no urgency in the radio traffic, just tires humming against asphalt and the steady rise and fall of Apex's breath from the back seat. Kira kept her eyes forward, but her thoughts drifted, unwilling, uninvited. Search and recovery. Stateside. Low visibility. Those words should have meant safe, controlled, predictable. They didn't. She learned that the most damage was often done far from gunfire, in places where no one expected violence, where oversight thinned, where reputations mattered more than people. The coordinates led them to a decommissioned training site near the edge of a floodplain. Concrete buildings half swallowed by vines, fences leaning like they'd given up, a place forgotten just enough to become useful to someone who wanted privacy. Apex stiffened the moment the car stopped. Kira felt it before she saw it. The air was wrong, too still. "Easy," she whispered, more for herself than him. The local sheriff met her near the gate, middle-aged, tired eyes, a man who'd seen enough to stop being impressed by uniforms. "Appreciate you coming," he said. "We lost a contractor, environmental assessment guy, went missing 3 days ago." "Any signs of struggle?" He hesitated. "Depends how you define signs." They walked the perimeter together. Broken glass, tire tracks deliberately wiped, a backpack found near the waterline too clean to be accidental. Apex pulled slightly toward the trees. Kira followed. The scent trail was faint but persistent. Fear, chemicals, blood that had been washed and hidden but never erased. "He's alive," she said quietly. The sheriff nodded. "That's what scares me." They moved deeper into the compound. Shadows stretched long as afternoon light faded. Kira felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the one that came when instinct started outrunning evidence. Apex stopped near an old storage building, sat, looked at her. "Alert." She radioed it in. Inside they found restraints, medical waste, signs of experimentation. Not sanctioned, not documented. Someone had been running tests off the books, using civilians, using animals. Kira's jaw clenched. This wasn't about one missing man. This was rot. The gunshot came without warning. Glass exploded. Apex lunged instinctively, dragging her behind concrete as rounds chewed into the wall. Kira returned fire only when necessary, precise, controlled, not to kill, just to stop. The shooter retreated into the trees. Backup arrived late, always late. By the time they tracked the trail, the suspect was gone, but the building was secured, evidence sealed, lives exposed to light that hadn't been meant for them. They found the contractor alive, barely, dehydrated, broken but breathing. When they loaded him into the ambulance, his eyes found Kira's. "They said no one would believe me," he whispered. She squeezed his hand. They were wrong. Back at base, reports stacked quickly, too quickly. Calls came from people who hadn't called before. Questions that danced around blame without nomming it. Someone wanted this quiet. Someone wanted her careful. Gallagher pulled her aside late that night. "You're stepping on bigger toes than you think," he warned. "I know." "Then slow down." She met his gaze. "I can't." He sighed. "Your father didn't either." That night Kira sat alone with Apex, polishing gear she didn't need to polish. Her hands moved while her mind spiraled. How many layers were there? How many times would she have to choose between safety and truth? The answer came in the form of an envelope slid under her door. Inside, photos, coordinates, names she recognized from old journals. and one message, typed and unsigned. You exposed us once. You won't survive twice. Her pulse steadied. Fear no longer surprised her. It clarified. The next morning she requested a meeting with Internal Oversight, Joint Task Force, Federal. She brought everything. She knew what it would cost. Friends, protection, plausible deniability. Apex watched her pack with quiet understanding. They're not wolves anymore, she said softly. They're cornered. The operation unfolded slowly, methodically, warrants, raids, suspensions that made the news in pieces, never the full picture. Retaliation came in smaller ways. Her car tampered with, a misstep on the stairs, a shot fired into the dark near the kennels that hit nothing and was meant to. She didn't report every incident. She documented them. One night while walking Apex under a moonless sky, she felt the shift, the moment before violence decided to arrive. A shadow moved wrong. She turned. Stop, she said. The figure froze. A young man stepped forward, nervous, armed, not trained well enough to hide it. They said you ruined everything, he said, that you deserved it. Kira didn't raise her weapon. She lowered it. They lied to you, she said, just like they lied to me. Apex growled low warning. The man's hands shook. Tears cut lines through the dirt on his face. I don't want to do this. Then don't, Kira replied. The gun fell. She called it in, by the book. Afterward, alone again, she sank to the ground, shaking. Apex pressed against her until the tremors passed. That was when she understood. Courage wasn't confrontation. It was restraint. It was choosing not to become what the darkness expected. The cases broke wide after that. Media attention, congressional murmurs, careers ended quietly, others loudly. Kira stayed where she was. With the dogs. With the work. Because some battles weren't won by leaving. They were won by staying long enough to change the ground beneath your feet. And though the threats didn't stop, they lost their power. Because fear, once faced fully, stopped being a leash. It became a signal. And Kira Blackwood had learned how to listen to it, without letting it decide who she was. Why did peace arrive so quietly, like it was afraid to disturb her? Kira noticed it one morning while tying her boots. No tension in her hands, no scan of the room for exits. Apex slept on his side instead of curled tight, chest rising slow and even. The bass outside her window was waking up the way it always had, engines, voices, flags snapping in the wind, but something inside her had shifted. Not relief. Acceptance. The investigations were still ongoing. They would be for years. Systems didn't purge themselves overnight, and rot didn't vanish just because light touched it once. But the noise had changed. The threats came less often now. When they did, they sounded tired, desperate. Predators hated being seen. Kira walked the kennels that morning, clipboard under one arm, coffee untouched in the other hand. Dogs greeted her with wagging tails, low woofs, quiet anticipation, not obedience born of fear. Trust. She stopped at Luna's old kennel. It was no longer empty. A young Malinois named Rook paced inside, alert, curious, still learning where he fit in the world. He sat when he saw her, head tilted, waiting. You're safe here, she told him softly. The words were for herself too. Later that day, Gallagher called her in again. This time he offered a chair. They're closing the task force, he said, officially. And unofficially. They'll keep watching, but the people who mattered are gone, or very careful now. Kira nodded. What happens to the dogs from the off-books program? They're being transferred. Rehab, new handlers, oversight. Good. Gallagher hesitated. They want to recognize you. She almost smiled. No, she said gently, they don't. He studied her. You're sure? I didn't do this to be visible. He exhaled. Your father said the same thing. That night, Kira drove alone to the edge of the base where the ocean met the cliffs. Apex ran ahead, stopping just short of the drop, ears catching every sound the wind carried. She sat on the hood of the car and watched the water churn below, endless, unforgiving, honest. I thought justice would feel louder, she said to the dark, like closure. Apex sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. She thought of Maddox, of Vance, of the young man who dropped his weapon instead of pulling the trigger, of Luna, of her father's hand steady on a leash, teaching her how to breathe before she ever learned how to fight. Some people paid for what they'd done. Others lived with it. Justice, she realized, wasn't an ending. It was a direction. The offer came a week later, official this time, transfer to a national training command, rewrite doctrine, influence policy, a chance to make sure what she'd uncovered never rooted itself so deeply again. She took 3 days to decide. On the 4th, she declined. Instead, she submitted a different request. K-9 Unit Oversight and Rehabilitation Lead, permanent. When the approval came through, she felt something close to pride, not for herself. For the dogs who would never know the difference, only that the world had become a little less cruel. The first time she trained a new handler under the revised protocols, she watched their hands tremble the way hers once had, watched fear flicker behind bravado. Slow down, she told them. They're listening even when you're not speaking. Apex demonstrated beside her, calm and focused, responding to subtle cues no one else could see. He trusts you, the handler said in awe. Kira shook her head. We trust each other. That night she opened her father's journal one last time. She didn't read it cover to cover. She didn't need to anymore. She flipped to the final page, the one she'd avoided for years. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I hope you stayed kind longer than I did. And if you ever feel alone, remember, quiet strength lasts the longest. She closed the book. Outside, Apex barked once, sharp and joyful, chasing something only he could see. Months passed. The base changed in small, meaningful ways. Less shouting, more accountability. Dogs lived longer. Handlers smiled more. Kira learned how to sleep without bracing for impact. She learned how to laugh without guilt. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the kennels gold, Thaddeus returned on a cane, thinner but alive. He stood beside her, watching the dogs train. You did good, he said. We did, she corrected. He nodded, yeah. When he left, she stayed behind, running her hand along the fence, feeling the rough metal beneath her palm. Solid, real. Apex pressed against her leg. What do you think happens after this? She asked him quietly. He looked up at her, tail thumping once as if to say, we keep going. Kira smiled. Not because everything was fixed, but because she finally understood her place in the work. She wasn't here to be celebrated. She wasn't here to be feared. She wasn't even here to be remembered. She was here to hold the line, to choose restraint when power tempted, to choose patience when anger begged for release, to choose dignity when cruelty tried to pass itself off as strength. As the lights dimmed and the base settled into night, Kira walked back toward her quarters, Apex at her side, footsteps steady, unhurried. The world was still dangerous, still flawed, still capable of terrible things. But somewhere between silence and courage, she had found her voice. And she no longer needed to raise it. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.